As working men across Europe became more involved in politics, it became increasingly clear that Karl Marx's predictions about the future of capitalism were not unfolding as he had expected. Marx believed that the Industrial Revolution would make workers progressively poorer, more exploited, and increasingly united in their opposition to the capitalist system. According to his theory, worsening living conditions would eventually push workers to launch a violent revolution, overthrow the capitalist class, and establish a classless communist society. By the late 19th century, however, many observers noticed that the situation was developing in a very different direction. Rather than becoming increasingly impoverished, many workers were experiencing gradual improvements in their lives. Wages were rising, working hours were declining, labor protections were expanding, and social welfare programs were beginning to emerge. Workers were also gaining political rights and electing representatives who could pursue reforms through democratic institutions. Instead of preparing for revolution, large numbers of workers were participating in elections, joining political parties, and seeking change through parliamentary means. These developments raised important questions about whether Marx's predictions accurately reflected the realities of industrial society and sparked intense debates within socialist movements about the best path towards social and economic reform. Workers across Europe were increasingly finding success through democratic participation rather than revolution. Instead of preparing to overthrow the capitalist system, many workers were winning elections, serving in parliaments, and using political institutions to advance their interests. Through social democratic and labor parties, they helped pass laws that improved wages, shortened working hours, increased workplace safety, and expanded protections such as unemployment benefits, old age pensions, and social insurance programs. These achievements challenged one of Karl Marx's central claims that parliaments were merely instruments of the capitalist class designed to maintain worker oppression. Rather than reinforcing exploitation, democratic governments in many European countries were responding to worker demands and enacting reforms that improved living standards. As workers gained both political influence and tangible economic benefits, many socialist thinkers began to question whether Marx's prediction of an inevitable violent revolution was accurate. The growing success of reform through democratic politics suggested that meaningful change could be achieved within the existing political system, forcing Marxists to confront the possibility that their theory did not fully match the realities of late 19th century Europe. The most significant challenge to orthodox Marxist theory came from Eduard Bernstein, a German socialist leader, member of the Social Democratic Party, SPD, and parliamentarian. In 1898, Bernstein published Evolutionary Socialism, a work that questioned some of Karl Marx's most important predictions. The title itself highlighted Bernstein's central argument: socialism would develop through gradual evolution rather than violent revolution. After observing political and economic developments in Europe, Bernstein concluded that capitalism was not collapsing as Marx had predicted. Instead, industrial societies were becoming more prosperous, workers' living standards were improving, and democratic governments were increasingly willing to enact reforms that benefited the working class. Bernstein argued that class warfare was not inevitable because workers were already gaining influence through democratic institutions. In many European countries, workers had won the right to vote, joined powerful political parties, and elected representatives to parliament. These representatives successfully pushed for higher wages, shorter working hours, safer working conditions, and expanded social welfare programs. Rather than overthrowing the existing system, workers were using elections and legislation to improve their lives. According to Bernstein, democracy provided a peaceful and effective path to social change. He also believed that capitalism could be reformed from within. Through government regulation, labor legislation, collective bargaining, and political pressure, the economic system could be reshaped to serve both workers and employers. Instead of seeing capitalism and socialism as locked in an inevitable revolutionary struggle, Bernstein viewed reform as a practical way to achieve greater social and economic justice. In essence, he argued that Marx had been wrong about the necessity of revolution. Socialism would emerge gradually through democratic reforms, rather than through a violent uprising. Bernstein's ideas became known as revisionism or evolutionary socialism, and they profoundly influenced many socialist parties in the 20th century. In 1891, another significant challenge to orthodox Marxist theory came from an unexpected source: the Catholic Church. That year, Pope Leo XIII issued the landmark papal encyclical Rerum Novarum, the New Order, which addressed the social and economic problems created by industrialization. Rather than siding unquestioningly with wealthy business owners, the Pope argued that employers had a moral responsibility to treat workers fairly and pay wages sufficient to support a decent standard of living. The encyclical also maintained that governments had a duty to protect workers from exploitation, recognized the legitimacy of labor unions, and condemned practices that harmed the working class. At the same time, it defended the right to own private property, rejecting both unrestricted capitalism and revolutionary socialism. For many Marxists, the document was surprising and troubling. Marx had argued that religion, and especially established churches, would serve the interests of the ruling class by encouraging workers to accept their condition rather than challenge it. He famously described religion as a force that helped sustain existing social inequalities. Yet Rerum Novarum appeared to contradict that prediction. Instead of defending industrial capitalists at all costs, the Catholic Church was openly criticizing worker exploitation and calling for reforms to improve labor conditions. By supporting workers' rights while rejecting revolution, the Church offered an alternative path to social reform that weakened the appeal of Marxist arguments and further suggested that significant improvements could be achieved without overthrowing the existing social and economic order. Following the publication of Rerum Novarum in 1891, a new group of political movements emerged across Europe that offered workers an alternative to both laissez-faire capitalism and Marxist revolution. These movements, commonly known as Christian socialist or Christian democratic parties, embraced many of the social concerns raised by Leo. They supported reforms designed to improve the lives of workers, including fair wages, better working conditions, and legal protections for labor. At the same time, they remained loyal to the teachings of the Catholic Church and rejected the Marxist call for class conflict and revolutionary upheaval. These parties attracted some working-class voters, but they were especially popular among small shopkeepers, farmers, artisans, and middle-class Catholics who were concerned about the growing power of large corporations, yet uncomfortable with socialism. By advocating social reform through democratic politics and Christian moral principles, Christian socialist parties provided another peaceful path for addressing the problems of industrial society. Their success further weakened Marx's prediction that workers would inevitably turn to revolution, demonstrating that many Europeans preferred reform, cooperation, and gradual change over violent class struggle. By the time World War I erupted in 1914, the political landscape of Europe had changed dramatically, making Marx's prediction of an imminent workers' revolution appear increasingly unlikely. Social democratic parties had become major political forces, commanding enormous voting blocs, winning substantial representation in national parliaments, and helping secure important labor protections for workers. Their success reflected the growing political engagement of both industrial workers and sections of the middle class, who increasingly sought reform through democratic institutions rather than revolutionary action. As a result, workers became invested in the political systems of their countries and viewed elections, legislation, and collective bargaining as practical means of achieving their goals. At the same time, workers' identities proved far more complex than Marx had anticipated. Many remained deeply loyal to their nations, governments, churches, and families, rather than viewing themselves primarily as members of an international working class. National pride, religious faith, and local community ties often shaped workers' political beliefs just as strongly as economic concerns. This became especially evident in 1914, when workers across Europe largely rallied behind their respective countries at the outbreak of war instead of uniting in a transnational class struggle. There were also compelling material reasons why revolutionary sentiment had weakened. By 1914, many European workers enjoyed a higher standard of living than ever before. Real wages had risen significantly, allowing workers to purchase more goods and improve their quality of life. Working hours had gradually declined, giving workers more leisure time, while governments increasingly adopted social protections such as insurance programs, labor regulations, and workplace safety measures. These improvements did not eliminate poverty or inequality, but they demonstrated that conditions could be improved within the existing political and economic system. As a result, by the eve of World War I, many Europeans believed that gradual reform, not violent revolution, offered the most promising path to social progress.